Hello and welcome to the Dailies. News of President Trump's decision to impose sweeping sanctions on Russia's oil sector dominated global headlines, signaling a sharp escalation in economic pressure against Moscow. In the Middle East, attention turned to Israel as the Knesset approved a controversial move to annex parts of the West Bank, drawing swift international reactions. Meanwhile, the ongoing public scandal surrounding Prince Andrew continued to capture widespread media attention and fuel public debate. One news story dominated international headlines today. As we said, President Trump's administration's decision to impose sweeping sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil after deadly Russian strikes on Ukraine and the suspension of a planned Trump-Putin meeting. The Washington Post explains in its report the sanctions cut the firms off from U.S. financial systems, marking Washington's most aggressive economic move since the war began. European allies are expected to follow suit, and the piece contends that the decision underscores a cooling in U.S.-Russia relations after Moscow rejected ceasefire proposals. It also highlights the strikes which killed 7 people, reinforced Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's argument that stronger long-range capabilities increase Russian willingness to negotiate. The report concludes with what analysts say Putin is obviously unwilling to settle without achieving deeper strategic goals, widening rift between Washington and Moscow. And as oil prices jump after the new American sanctions on Russia, The Guardian asked whether these sanctions will be effective and why is Trump imposing them now. The explainer contends the sanctions mark a significant escalations in Donald Trump's approach to the war in Ukraine. It quotes U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who framed the move as a response to Vladimir Putin's refusal to end the conflict. The sanctions freeze U.S. assets, ban American business with the firms, and threaten secondary sanctions on foreign banks, particularly those in China, India, and Turkey. The explainer concludes analysts are divided on their effectiveness. While some say the measures could tighten pressure on Russia's oil revenues, others argue the Kremlin has proven adept at evading such restrictions. Ultimately, impact depends on U.S. enforcement and the broader economic ripple effects. Russian media and official sources largely rejected and downplayed the Trump administration's new sanctions. The Kremlin framed the measures as symbolic and ineffective, insisting they would not impact the economy or the war effort. Pro-Kremlin media outlets linked the timing to the cancelled Trump-Putin summit in Budapest, portraying the sanctions as a pressure tactic rather than a policy shift. However, some other outlets reported on the effect of these sanctions on the ground. Kommersant reported on the imposition of the sanctions, saying the companies responsible for more than 50% of Russia's oil production were added to the SDN list, freezing their U.S. assets and threatening secondary sanctions against foreign banks involved in related transactions. The piece highlights analysts expect lower intermediary chains, wider oil discounts and reduced profits, though the sector has time to prepare. It also notes shares in both companies subject to the sanctions fell 4% on Moscow's markets. In an exclusive, The Wall Street Journal revealed that the United States Department of Defense has quietly lifted a key restriction on Ukraine's use of Storm Shadow cruise missiles, allowing Kiev to strike deeper into Russian territory. The report contends that the decision is tied to President Donald Trump's diplomatic maneuvering with Moscow, and it shifts approval authority to U.S. European Command and bypasses previous Pentagon oversight. The piece notes Ukraine has already used the Storm Shadow missile to hit a munitions plant in Bryansk, escalating pressure on the Kremlin. The move coincides with Trump backing away from providing Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, which have far greater range. The report concludes that while not a battlefield game changer, the policy underscores Washington's attempt to increase Kiev's leverage while simultaneously nudging both sides towards negotiations. The Middle East remained in focus as the Israeli Knesset narrowly approves the first reading of a bill to apply full Israeli sovereignty to settlements in the West Bank, advancing a major shift in Israeli policy. The Times of Israel focused on the American reaction to this latest development as Secretary of State Marco Rubio warned that the vote could undermine Donald Trump's Gaza peace plan. The report quotes Rubio, who, speaking before his trip to Israel, stressed that annexation is not something we'd be supportive of right now, echoing Trump's stance that such moves are counterproductive. The piece explains the annexation bills passed with a zero-thin vote despite opposition from Benjamin Netanyahu and most of his Likud party. Regional and international backlash swiftly followed, with Saudi Arabia calling the legislation a red line. The piece underscores the White House's fears that this annexation could fracture international support, escalate regional tensions, and weaken the fragile ceasefire with Hamas, jeopardizing Trump's wider Middle East strategy. Haaretz examines accusations to Benjamin Netanyahu's government of shaping a narrative to deflect responsibility for the failures surrounding the October 7 Hamas attacks. The analysis highlights that with a state inquiry postponed and elections approaching, pro-government voices, including right-wing columnists and politicians, have increasingly blamed hostage families, pro-democracy protesters, and Israel's judicial system for weakening the nation and prolonging the war. Figures like Amichai Eliyahu and Yariv Levin have pointed fingers at the Supreme Court and past peace processes, aiming to redirect scrutiny away from Netanyahu's leadership. The piece notes behind the scenes plans are reportedly underway to form a government-friendly inquiry commission, allowing Netanyahu to control the accountability narrative and minimize his political exposure. British media continue to focus on the latest scandal surrounding Prince Andrew and the official reactions to it. The Times details how UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has backed the idea of a parliamentary inquiry into the 75-year lease that allows Prince Andrew, Duke of York, to live rent-free at the Royal Lodge. Lawmakers argue the arrangement secured for a symbolic peppercorn rent may shortchange taxpayers. Ministers and MPs from multiple parties are calling for full scrutiny of the Crown estate, with some urging Andrew to face questioning over both his finances and his ties to Jeffrey Epstein. The piece also talks about the public frustration, saying it is mounting over the prince's privileged status despite his diminished royal role. A new bill has also been introduced to give the king the power to strip titles, signaling broader debate over royal accountability and public funding. And we'll end with this cartoon also published by The Times, which satirically comments on the ongoing public scandal surrounding Prince Andrew, and also, of course, the broader British royal family. King Charles III is shown, as you can see, in the confessional chamber with Pope Francis during the royal visit to Rome to pray with the Pope. He begins with, "Forgive me, Father," before deflecting, and he says, "But if you think that that's bad, you should meet my brother." Of course, that's considered a jab at Prince Andrew, Duke of York, while Queen Camilla, as you can see, stands outside listening. The cartoon humorously contrasts the formality of a papal meeting with royal scandal. It highlights how controversy continues to shadow the monarchy's image. That's it for today. Thanks for watching.